being different in the car scene is something that a lot of people aspire to be. However, how do you accomplish that? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can accomplish being different, but should you? Well, in the case of the cars on this list, I think you can be different and have a great time when it comes to owning something that a lot of people don't, or a lot of people don't give enough credit. And to get us into the spirit of this video, let's crack open this, what is this? Strawberry apricot Red Bull? I don't know. It's good, probably. I know exactly what you're thinking. The 30 seconds I've seen of this guy so far has absolutely convinced me that I need to see him with more energy. And number one on this list, what was that? And number one on this list is the Cobalt SS and or the Saturn Ion Redline. They're essentially the same car. They have slightly different aesthetics basically, so you can pick your poison on which one you like more. And don't worry, a lot of people picked that for you because a lot more of the Cobalt SS's were sold in general than the Saturn Ion Redlines. But these cars are super fun. And when I say they're super fun, I mean, I have experienced how fun this car is because my brother-in-law, Sam, who now owns a Challenger, his first really fun car was a Cobalt SS supercharged. And he did a lot of fun mods with that. He did wheels and tires, coilovers, a different shifter, a different intake, just a lot of stuff that honestly made a big difference in how the car drove and how it felt. And the kicker is, at the time, if I'm not mistaken, he bought this car for under $3,000. Now granted, they're kind of hard to find for that price range. A lot of times they're slightly more expensive than that, but regardless, you can get these cars for under 10 and sometimes under 5 pretty commonly, and they're a lot of fun. The supercharged ones are hilarious. Just hearing a screaming supercharger from under the hood of a Cobalt is weird. But if you can find one of the later turbo models, those are even better. Instead of making, I think it's 205 horsepower for the earlier cars, it's like 260 for the newer cars. They sound better, they're generally more tunable, and they make more power more easily. They have upgraded front brakes and a few other things. And no, the Cobalt is by no means the nicest car of all time. The interior, it's mid-2000s GM. I mean, your expectations can only carry you so far. And the driving dynamics are actually a lot of fun with a couple small modifications. The aforementioned modifications that Sam made, being the coilovers and tires, really transformed that car and made it a pretty good backroad little machine. And obviously all these things I'm talking about with the Cobalt SS also apply to the Saturn Ion Redline. If you really want to be unique, finding one of those is an even better option because like I said, there's just not as many of them around. But hey, if you're looking for something cheap and fun, give them a chance. They're actually way more fun than people give them credit for. Number two is the Buick Regal GS. Now this car was like kind of a little bit of like a darling of certain like automotive magazines when it came out. I'm not saying it's an amazing performance car, but it was, you know, a pretty nice and pretty fun performance car for not a lot of money that I think is a really good looking car, and the numbers that they put out is not bad. Speaking of the numbers, for the earlier Buick Regal GS's, like I believe 2012 and up, the horsepower was right at 270, which is pretty impressive, and you could get it in either a front wheel drive with the option of a, I think just 6-speed automatic or manual, or you could get it in all-wheel drive with the auto only. Later models of the car came with a V6 with 310 horsepower up front, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe they were all-wheel drive and auto at that point. But the earlier models especially, you can get for really, really good prices, and they're a fairly nice car overall for what you're getting. They're fairly reliable, and 270 horsepower is a respectable number for sure. And not to mention the fact that you can get it in a 6-speed manual. A lot of even somewhat performance-minded sedans, that's just not a reality. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think that they're gonna be the next like performance platform of the world or something like that, but I do think that for people that want like a performance-minded daily driver, this is a great option that I don't see hardly anyone noticing. Number three is the Pontiac Fiero. And I know, GM really jinxed themselves by naming it something that sounds vaguely like fire.
Can't trust them foreign cars, you know?
Which they do at times. But if you think about it, it was called the poor man's Ferrari, and Ferraris also tend to do that at times. But two things. First of all, not every Fiero is going to catch fire. That was a huge recall of every 4-cylinder Fiero ever made up to that point. A Fiero you buy nowadays shouldn't have that problem if you buy a 4-cylinder Fiero. However, I would recommend going with the GT V6 models, which have definitely more power, are generally better looking, and those did not have issues with catching fire. The 4-cylinder Fieros, yes, they did catch fire. That was also arguably the worst version of the Fiero. It had I was about to say Ford for some reason, the GM Iron Duke engine that you could find in S10s, or I don't know, mail trucks. So yeah, not exactly the most exciting power plant. The V6 and the Pontiac Fiero GTs, however, had up to 142 horsepower, and although I know that's not a lot, this isn't a car that weighs under 2,700 pounds. It's lighter than something like a BRZ, and yes, it is slower than that, but this is also a car from the 80s when American 7.5 liter V8s made like 8 horsepower. In a world where so many people love MR2s and the Corvette is finally mid-engined and things like that, and you know, cheap Porsche Boxsters are starting to become a thing, I do think that some more people should start looking at the Fiero. I understand, they're super unsafe, they're super unstable, they're generally not super good cars stock, but I think that in a sense, that's what might make them a fun platform to modify. So if you want to be that brave person that risks your life and your reputation with everyone that you know, then hey, Pontiac Fiero might be the option for you. Number 4 is the Saturn Sky. You might be thinking, why did this guy put 2 Saturns on this list? I already lost all respect for him at the first one. First of all, you had respect for me before this? Second of all, everyone loves Miatas, and the Saturn Sky is kind of GM's attempt at making a Miata. And by the Saturn Sky being GM's attempt at making a Miata, I basically mean the Pontiac Solstice was their attempt at making a Miata, and the Saturn Sky is a Pontiac Solstice with a different front end, which is arguably better looking, albeit kind of too chromy. Now the Saturn Skies, along with the Pontiac Solstices, do have a little bit of a cult following, but nothing huge. The Saturn Sky in particular has its own kind of category of people that really like them. For instance, my good friend Zane really likes the Saturn Sky, and he would love to own one. He also owned a Geo Metro, so do what you will with that information. Hi Zane, comment something clever. Or something dumb, I don't know, sorry for putting you on spot. But the base model Saturn Skies as well as Solstices weighed something like 2,900 pounds or something along those lines, which is not as light as a I don't know what stroke I just had, but I was trying to say Miata. But they also had 173 horsepower, which is respectable, all things considered. But the big kicker is you can also get the Saturn Sky Redline or the Saturn Solstice. Dude, I am not killing it right now. Or the Pontiac Solstice GXP, which had 260 horsepower, which at that point, that's pretty respectable for a car that's that small and that lightweight. A lot of reviews that have compared them to Miatas and other similar cars have said that the dynamics are not quite as on point as a Miata or something similar, but they're not far off and they're very, very fun in their own right. And you can find them for really good prices. And if you want a Miata, but you don't want a Miata, hey, this is a good choice for you. Or in the case of me, I'm 6'5". I actually do not fit in most Miata generations. No matter how I position the seat, my head pushes up on the roof if it's down. It doesn't matter if I try to slouch down, anything I do, I don't fit in them. I could not own one. However, a Saturn Sky or a Solstice, I probably could. So hey, if you're a big guy like me, then first of all, sorry, it's not a tall man's world. And also, buy a Saturn Sky. Or, I don't know, a van. Number 5 on this list is the Porsche 924. And by, I guess, extension, you could say the Porsche 944, but there's a reason why I specifically chose the 924, which is, you know, everyone kind of knows the 944. It has its own cult following. A lot of people like them. I think they're underrated in their own right, especially the turbo models as like a collector's Porsche. But if you're interested in a 944, especially the non-turbo models, also consider the 924. It's a very, very similar car. You can look at the two and it's immediately apparent. The 924 does not have quite as much of like the bulging arches that are on the 944s. It's a little bit more sleek and just kind of streamlined looking. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the 944s have slightly different engines than the 924s. The 924s were just using Volkswagen engines at that point. But they're really fun little cars that are designed to handle awesome and I think look awesome. And it's still a Porsche. And I think pretty much literally any Porsche that has been made in history deserves some respect. And yes, this car was very heavily Volkswagen focused, but it's still a great car. They're not fast. And when I say they're not fast, I mean literally the base models make like 95 horsepower. But calm down, this is a car that only weighs in the range of 2,300-ish pounds, which is literally Miata weight. And yes, it has even less horsepower than a Miata. This is an older car, of course. This is a car that, if I'm not mistaken, came out in the later 70s. And you can find the turbo models, which, good luck. If you can, however, they make about 150 horsepower, which is respectable for what it is. It's still not a lot. But as either an engine swap platform or just something to cruise around on the back roads with, this is at its core a momentum car, as people say, and it's a great one. And I think it's a very good looking car, and just owning a clean old Porsche is, beyond being a fun car to drive, just a cool experience, and I think that they deserve more respect. Respect the 924, even if its horsepower levels are Mitsubishi Mirage-esque. Number 6 on the list is the Pontiac Vibe GT or the Toyota Matrix XRS. Believe it or not, they're the same car. Different body style, same almost everything else. And that almost everything else they share includes the beautiful Toyota-derived 2ZZ GE, which is a great motor in its own right. It makes 180 horsepower stock and is capable of revving past 8,000 RPM, which is hilarious for a little hatchback, especially something you look at like a Pontiac Vibe, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's definitely a 2000s GM piece of crap hatchback. And then you drive it and you're like, whoa, this is a piece of crap 2000s GM hatchback, but it revs really high. And that's great because, I don't know, it's cool. And 180 horsepower, that's pretty good, all things considered. These are not very heavy cars. I'm not 100% positive of the weight off the top of my head, but it certainly has to be under 3,000 pounds, and 180 horsepower, that's pretty respectable. And this is an engine that has just a very fun power band, very Honda VTEC-esque. It is a VVT-L engine, so it's variable valve timing and lift, and so you get the classic which, you know, is a great way to annoy your neighbors. But honestly, I feel like if you're interested in like a Golf GTI or some sort of like hot hatch for a daily driver, especially if you're looking for something cheap, try to find a Pontiac Vibe GTI. That's not what it's called. A Pontiac Vibe GT or a Toyota Matrix XRS, and that'll be a really fun, practical, reliable car for you because it's a Toyota. Number 7, the SRT4 Dodge Caliber. Let's be clear, get this out of the way immediately. The Dodge Caliber is a piece of crap car. It is of the era of just the most garbage Mopar vehicles ever. It's not a good vehicle. It is not very intelligently designed or packaged, and it's ugly. The interior is made of like, I don't know, hyper compressed charcoal. It's not great, but for a brief moment of light, they made the SRT4 Caliber, and it almost made it worth enduring all of that. And if you're willing to endure all of that, come with me to the land of the SRT4 Caliber, which is not actually in the dark part of the garage behind me. I don't know why I did that. But the SRT4 Caliber made 285 horsepower. That is a lot. In the same year they were making that, the Mustang of essentially this same generation, but pre-facelift to the later S197s, was only making 315 horsepower with a V8. 285 horsepower. Very few companies are putting that through the front wheels of a car even now. And in a world where so many people all of a sudden want and love SRT4 neons, and those are impossible to find in any sort of good shape whatsoever nowadays, why is almost no one looking at the SRT4 Caliber? I get it, it's not as good looking. The factory body kit looks like it's straight out of Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. The interior is arguably even worse than the neon, which who knew that was even possible? And it just doesn't have the same reputation. But guess what? I think it deserves some serious love. They didn't sell well new, and nowadays they're almost not out there. You can find them, and if you're interested in one, again, if you want some sort of hot hatch type vehicle, something practical that's fun, you should look for one. Because as much as it is a piece of crap, it's a fast piece of crap, and I support that behavior. Number 8 is the Pontiac Grand Prix GTP/GXP. Now I'm putting these into one because these are both just performance versions of the Grand Prix, and they span different generations. You could get a GTP in the 90s to early 2000s Grand Prix, and a GTP in the mid 2000s to the later 2000s Grand Prix. And for that second generation of the GTP, you could also get the GXP, which had an LS4 V8 up front. But these are practical American mid-size sedans that in the 1990s up to early 2000s, they made 240 horsepower from a 3.8 liter supercharged V6. Later years, in the mid-2000s, that was bumped up to 260, and for the GXPs with the LS4 V8 is over 300, I think it's 303 or 305 horsepower. That's all being pushed through the front wheels, and that is a recipe for probably disaster. But if you can ride the edge of disaster, it's definitely a recipe for fun. It's just so absurd that GM did this with the V8 in particular for the GXPs when no one else was gonna do that. That is just hilarious. And I'm not saying this is probably the greatest platform to do that much with performance-wise. Of course, it's still an LS engine. These are not the best LS engines ever made, but they are aluminum block. They're not really worth swapping into other stuff because all the accessories are built for a transverse engine. You can do it, but you're better off just starting with something else like an L33. These things are great sleepers and a really fun way to just surprise people with how fast they can be. No one's expecting a lopey cammed V8 Grand Prix to walk them at a stoplight, but if you can, that's gonna feel good. So consider these things, because these things need more love. They were pretty popular in the American tuner scene, especially the earlier ones of the later 90s, but nowadays they're kind of forgotten. And you can also get the earlier Regal GS's, also supercharged as well. Very similar car, same power plant. That's another option as well if you want to look like just the fastest grandma mobile. So if you're looking for the earlier cars, you've got options. You can look like a really fast middle school teacher, or you can look like a really fast middle school teacher from 50 years ago. Number 9 is two different cars, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but just go with me here. It is the V6 versions of the Mustang and Camaro, particularly of the most recent generations, because in past years, the V6 of these cars was just so weak in comparison. The naturally aspirated 4 cylinders of these cars in the 80s made like 90 horsepower, which is really not good for a car of their weight. But the modern day V6s, like the V6 that you can find in the S197 Mustang or earlier S550s, or the 3.6 liter V6 that you can find in the newer 5th gen and 6th gen Camaros, they are unbelievably slept on. I get that there's a stigma that's probably always gonna exist with muscle cars, that the V8 is the one that you want and the V6 is the one that only exists to sell to people that like how it looks, or rental car agencies. But these manufacturers have done a lot to make these V6s very respectable in performance in recent years. I pointed this out in a short recently that V6 Mustangs are criminally underrated because the Cyclone 3.7 liter V6 engine you can find in these cars, this one's not that, this is a GT, but regardless, it makes 307 horsepower in a car that weighs 3,500, 3,400 pounds, maybe something like that, is practically 370Z numbers, and you can find them for very inexpensive. And in the case of the newest generation Camaros, the V6s even make 330 some odd horsepower, which is better than the earlier Mustangs of this generation, like I mentioned as well. It's 15 more horsepower than this was making with a 4.6 liter V8. These are impressive numbers, and these are engines that can withstand forced induction fairly well too. People are putting like a Pro Charger or, I don't know, a Paxton or something like that on these 3.7s and making like 470, 480 wheel horsepower, which is insane. And I can imagine, although I'm not 100% sure, that the results are very similar with the Camaros as well. Not to mention that even stock it's not like these cars are slouches. They're easily faster than their V8 counterparts of yesteryear. And a lot of times the engines are actually lighter at the front end. So if you want a budget track build or drift missile or something like that, the V6s might even be the better choice. That point is arguable, but I'm just saying, respect V6s, they can do a lot. And number 10 on this list is short bed, rear wheel drive V8 trucks. Or short bed, rear wheel drive trucks of almost any sort that can accept an engine swap. But for instance, if you get like a 99 to 2007 Chevy Silverado, single cab, short bed, rear wheel drive with a 5.3 V8, that's an engine you can throw a cam in, throw a turbo on and make, I don't know, probably 600 horsepower at the wheels, and you got an awesome drag truck or street truck. It honestly boggles my mind how outside of like the drag racing scene, nobody really thinks of this or does anything with it. People are all about muscle cars and whatever and, you know, going in a straight line with a V8 and stuff like that, when you can do it with a truck if all you want is the speed for so cheap. And let us not forget, trucks are sick. Everyone loves Raptors. Everyone loves the earlier Lightnings. And there's good reason. Those trucks are sick. These trucks can also be really, really sick. So if you want to make something fast, keep these trucks in mind. Check out Taylor Ray's channel. I don't know why I'm shouting him out so much recently, but it's a great channel. He has an LS street truck that is essentially this sort of build turned up to 10, and the thing is absolutely sick. It looks pretty much stock. It makes a ton of horsepower. It's really fast. It's green. What could be better? So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel for more car content of this sort. I upload every Wednesday, Saturday. I also upload a short every single day throughout the week. And I appreciate you guys very much stopping by the video. Hopefully you guys also have noticed the increase in, I guess, production value or video quality that we have going on with the different lights and whatnot in here, as well as just general editing and filming. And if you have noticed, let me know. And if you think it's trash, doesn't really affect my life that much, but I'll try to make it better. Also, I've only drank half this can. I'm just a hyper person. This has nothing to do with it. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, I have been Colton. This is Colton Does Cars, and I will see you guys next time.